Have you ever witnessed a moment of pure courage that changed everything? Imagine finding a desperate mother willing to risk everything to save her child. This isn't just another animal rescue story. It's a journey that will break your heart and put it back together. In the next few minutes, you'll discover how a starving, abused mare named Willow traveled 20 miles to find help for her dying foal. You'll feel every moment of Emma's impossible choice and the remarkable bond that formed between three broken souls finding healing together. What happens when trust is rebuilt after unimaginable betrayal? Stay with me to find out. I promise this story of survival against all odds will be worth every second. If you're already feeling touched by this story, hit that subscribe button right now. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Are you a horse lover or just someone who believes in second chances? I read every comment and can't wait to connect with you all. Now, let's begin our journey to that misty Montana morning that changed everything. Emma Sullivan tightened her weathered flannel jacket against the early Montana chill as she stepped onto her front porch. The sun had barely crested the jagged Bridger Mountains, casting long shadows across her 20 acres of hard-earned ranch land. At 43, the fine lines around her eyes told stories of harsh winters and scorching summers spent building this place from nothing after leaving behind a corporate career in Seattle that had nearly broken her spirit. Another day, she murmured, her breath visible in the autumn air. The morning ritual never changed. Coffee at 5 a.m., check the fences by 6, feed the 3 horses, and small herd of cattle before the day properly began. But this morning was different. As Emma rounded the corner of her modest farmhouse toward the gravel path leading to the barn, she stopped dead in her tracks. Through the rising ground mist stood the silhouette of a horse, motionless, head hanging low. It wasn't one of hers. "What in God's name?" she whispered, instinctively reaching for the small flashlight in her jacket pocket. The beam cut through the mist, revealing a mare in shocking condition. Its once-bay coat was matted with mud and what looked disturbingly like dried blood. One front leg was favored heavily, the hoof barely touching the ground. Ribs protruded sharply beneath its hide, evidence of severe undernourishment. "Hey there," Emma called softly, years of horse handling evident in her measured tone. "Easy, girl." The mare's ears flicked forward, but she didn't bolt. Her eyes, dark and liquid, held Emma's with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. "Where'd you come from?" Emma took a cautious step forward, scanning the horizon. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and they didn't keep horses. The wild Mustang herds occasionally ventured down from the highlands, but they never approached human dwellings. The mare's nostrils flared, taking in Emma's scent. Something about the animal's demeanor struck Emma as odd. Not fear, exactly, but purpose. Almost as if it had deliberately sought her out. "You're not from around here, are you?" Emma murmured, noting a faded halter mark across the bridge of the mare's nose. Clear evidence this was no wild horse. "Someone's done you wrong, girl." Emma's hand moved slowly toward her phone. The local sheriff needed to know about this. Horse theft was still a serious crime in Montana, and abandoned animals were becoming more common as drought conditions strained local ranchers' resources. "I should call this in," she said aloud, but hesitated as the mare took a faltering step toward her, then another, muscles trembling with the effort. "Whoa now," Emma cautioned, but the horse continued its approach until they stood mere feet apart. The stench of sweat and blood was strong, mixed with the unmistakable metallic scent of fear. In that moment, as the rising sun broke fully over the mountains, Emma saw what she'd missed before, dried afterbirth staining the mare's hindquarters. "Jesus," she breathed. "You foaled recently." The mare nickered softly, a sound so plaintive it seemed to echo across the empty fields. Then, with a deliberate shift of weight, she turned her head toward the direction she'd come from, as if indicating something beyond the mist. Emma felt a growing sense of dread. Something was terribly wrong here, and whatever it was, this desperate animal had somehow found its way to her doorstep for help. The mare took another labored step forward, her eyes never leaving Emma's face. There was an intelligence in that gaze that made Emma's breath catch, a desperate, pleading quality she'd never seen in an animal before. "What is it, girl?" Emma whispered, her hand instinctively reaching out, stopping short of touching the trembling animal. The mare turned again, this time with more urgency, taking several halting steps back toward the misty field before stopping to look over her shoulder at Emma. The message couldn't have been clearer if she'd spoken. "Follow me. You want me to come with you?" Emma hesitated, glancing back at her house. Common sense told her to call animal control first, but something in the mare's demeanor compelled her forward. "All right then." Emma followed at a respectful distance as the mare limped painfully across the field, veering toward a shallow drainage ditch that ran along the property line. The morning mist was beginning to burn off in patches, revealing glimpses of what lay ahead. And then Emma saw it. A small, motionless form lying in the tall grass. "Oh no," she gasped, quickening her pace. The mare reached the spot first, gently nudging the tiny bundle with her muzzle. As Emma drew closer, her heart sank. A newborn foal, its coat still damp in places, lay curled on its side, alarmingly still. "Is it?" Emma couldn't finish the question as she knelt beside the tiny creature. To her immense relief, she detected the shallow rise and fall of its ribcage. "It's alive." The foal was impossibly delicate, spindly legs folded awkwardly, eyes closed, its dark coat slicked with afterbirth. It couldn't have been more than a few hours old. What struck Emma most was how small it was, dangerously undersized, even for a newborn. "The poor thing is freezing," Emma muttered, shrugging off her jacket and gently wrapping it around the foal. The mare watched intently, her nostrils flaring with each anxious breath. When Emma carefully lifted the foal, the mare let out a shrill whinny that cut through the morning air like a knife. "It's okay," Emma soothed, though her voice shook. "I'm trying to help." She cradled the foal against her chest, feeling its faint heartbeat. The mare circled nervously, her injured leg momentarily forgotten in her distress. "We need to get this little one warm," Emma said firmly, making a decision. "Come on, both of you." As if understanding, the mare fell into step beside Emma as she carried the precious bundle toward the barn. They made an odd procession across the field, the limping mother, the woman cradling the dying foal, and the long shadows of early morning stretching out behind them. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" Emma murmured, noting fresh cuts on the mare's flanks that looked suspiciously like whip marks. "Someone did this to you." The mare nickered softly, nudging at Emma's elbow as if to hurry her along. "I'll call you Willow," Emma said suddenly, the name coming to her as she watched the mare's gentle persistence despite her obvious pain. Like the tree, bent but not broken. Willow's ears pricked forward at the sound of her new name, and for a brief moment, Emma could have sworn she saw understanding in those large, liquid eyes. "And this little fighter," Emma continued, looking down at the foal's fragile form. "We'll figure out a name for you too. But first, we've got to get you somewhere safe." The barn was just ahead now, its weathered red paint catching the morning light. Emma felt the foal stir weakly in her arms, and her resolve hardened. Whatever storm had brought these two broken creatures to her doorstep, she wasn't about to turn them away. Standing at the entrance to her barn, Emma felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her shoulders as heavily as the small foal in her arms. The barn, meticulously maintained and housing her 3 prized quarter horses, was her sanctuary, her livelihood, her investment. Introducing an unknown animal, especially one in such poor condition, carried risks she couldn't ignore. "Damn it," she muttered, shifting the foal's weight as she fumbled with the latch. The little creature let out a weak sound, somewhere between a whimper and a sigh. Behind her, Willow stomped nervously, her eyes darting between her foal and the looming structure ahead. Her nostrils flared at the scent of other horses inside. "This is crazy," Emma said aloud. "I don't know you. I don't know where you've come from or what you're carrying." Years of hard-won ranching experience flashed through her mind. Stories of strangles outbreaks that had devastated entire stables, the parasites that could infect healthy animals, the behavioral problems that could develop from introducing strange horses without proper quarantine. From inside the barn came the familiar sound of her horses shifting in their stalls, sensing the newcomers outside. "I should call Dr. Reeves," Emma reasoned, referring to the local veterinarian. "Get you both checked out properly before." The foal shuddered in her arms, its breathing growing more labored. Emma didn't need a vet to tell her the little one was fading fast. Every minute counted now. Willow seemed to sense her indecision. The mare stepped forward, pressing her mud-caked forehead against Emma's shoulder in a gesture so trusting it made Emma's throat tighten. "You're putting me in one hell of a spot here," Emma whispered, but her voice had lost its edge. Inside the barn, Emma's gelding, Rusty, whinnied curiously. The sound seemed to startle Willow, who backed away several paces, eyes wide with renewed fear. Jake would have known what to do, Emma murmured, thinking of her late husband. 3 years since the accident, and she still found herself looking to him for answers that would never come. The foal trembled against her chest, its life literally in her hands. Emma made her decision. To hell with protocol, she said firmly. Let's get you both inside. She pushed the barn door open with her shoulder, releasing the familiar smells of hay, horse, and leather polish. Rusty and her other horses peered over their stall doors, ears pricked forward at the commotion. Easy, everyone, Emma called to her horses. We've got company. She headed straight for the empty stall at the far end, the one she'd been saving for the yearling she planned to buy in the spring. Fresh straw covered the floor, and the water trough was clean. It would have to do. As she laid the foal gently on the straw, Emma glanced back to see Willow hovering uncertainly at the barn entrance. The mare's eyes never left her baby, but fear kept her rooted to the spot. It's okay, Emma coaxed. He needs you now. Willow's ears flicked back and forth as she weighed threat against necessity. The other horses watched silently from their stalls, creating an audience to this strange standoff. Emma stayed perfectly still beside the foal, one hand resting lightly on its heaving side. Your call, Willow, she said quietly. But he's not going to make it without you. The words hung in the air between them, woman and mare, a moment of understanding that transcended species. Then, with painful slowness, Willow took one limping step into the barn. Then another, and another. Emma exhaled slowly. That's it, girl. You're safe here. As Willow crossed the threshold, Emma knew there was no turning back. Whatever consequences came from this decision, she would face them head-on, just as she had faced everything else since Jake's death. The mare and foal were now her responsibility, whether she was ready for it or not. The heavy barn door swung shut with a familiar creak as Emma secured it against the growing morning chill. Willow flinched at the sound, but kept her focus on her foal, who lay motionless in the fresh straw. The mare approached cautiously, her injured leg dragging slightly as she navigated the unfamiliar space. Easy does it, Emma murmured, stepping back to give the mare room. Willow lowered her head to nuzzle her baby, nickering softly in a language only mothers and their young could understand. The foal's response was barely perceptible, a slight twitch of an ear, a flutter of eyelids still sealed shut against the world. Emma moved toward the tack room at the far end of the barn. I'll be right back, she called softly. Going to get some supplies. Her own horses watched with curious eyes as she passed their stalls. Rusty, her chestnut gelding, snorted disapprovingly at the newcomers. Hush now, Emma scolded gently. They're guests. In the tack room, Emma grabbed an armful of clean towels, a bottle of antiseptic, some salve for wounds, and a worn horse blanket she kept for emergencies. Her hands worked methodically while her mind raced. The mare needed medical attention. Those wounds could turn septic without proper care. And the foal, Emma swallowed hard. The foal might not make it through the morning. When she returned to the stall, she found Willow had lain down beside her baby, her body curved protectively around the tiny form. The mare's eyes were half closed with exhaustion, but they snapped open as Emma approached. Just me, Emma said, moving slowly as she entered the stall. Let's get you both cleaned up a bit. Kneeling in the straw, Emma began the delicate process of examining the foal. Its breathing was shallow but steady, its coat still matted with birthing fluids. Using warm water from a bucket she'd filled, she gently cleaned the little one's face and body. Born too soon, weren't you? She whispered, noting the foal's underdeveloped frame. You're a fighter, though. I can tell. Willow watched every movement with wary attention, occasionally stretching her neck to sniff Emma's hands. The mare's body trembled with exhaustion, but she refused to close her eyes completely. You need to rest, Emma told her, switching her attention to the mare's wounds. Let me take a look at that leg. The injury wasn't as bad as Emma had feared, a deep cut rather than a break, but ugly enough to need attention. As she worked to clean it, Willow tensed but didn't pull away. Someone did this to you, Emma muttered, anger rising as she discovered a pattern of welts across Willow's flanks, unmistakably caused by human cruelty. Who would do such a thing? Outside, The sound of a vehicle approaching caught Emma's attention. Glancing at her watch, she realized it was nearly 7:30. Toby, her part-time ranch hand, would be arriving for work. "Stay put," she told Willow, rising stiffly from her crouched position. "I'll be right back." Emma stepped out of the barn just as Toby's ancient blue pickup rattled to a stop. The 19-year-old local hopped out, adjusting his worn cowboy hat against the morning sun. "Morning, Miss Sullivan," he called, grabbing his work gloves from the truck bed. "Toby, we've got a situation," Emma said without preamble. She quickly explained the morning's events as the young man's eyes widened. "Abandoned, you think?" he asked, his youthful face creasing with concern. "Or escaped?" Emma replied grimly. "Either way, they're in bad shape. The foal especially." Toby nodded seriously. "My uncle's got that warming box he uses for premature calves. I could bring it over." "That would be a lifesaver," Emma said, relief washing over her. "And Toby, not a word about this to anyone yet. Not until I figure out what we're dealing with." "Yes, ma'am," he replied with the solemn sincerity that had made him her most trusted helper. "I'll be back in 20. As Toby's truck disappeared down the driveway, Emma returned to the barn. In her absence, Willow had somehow managed to coax the foal to nurse, though the effort seemed to exhaust both of them. "That's it," Emma encouraged, staying by the stall door to avoid disturbing them. "Every drop helps." For the first time since their bizarre encounter began, Emma allowed herself to hope. Perhaps, with enough care and a healthy dose of luck, they might both pull through. As if reading her thoughts, Willow lifted her head and gazed at Emma with those impossibly expressive eyes. In that silent exchange, a tentative trust began to form, fragile as a new leaf, but undeniably real. Night fell across the Montana ranch with the sudden intensity of autumn, bringing with it a bitter cold that seeped through the barn's wooden walls. Emma had spent the day moving between the house and barn, bringing supplies, making calls, and tending to her unexpected guests. Toby's uncle's warming box had been set up in the corner of the stall, providing a gentle heat that the foal desperately needed. Now, by the warm glow of the barn's overhead lights, Emma sat on an upturned bucket, wrapped in her heaviest coat, watching the pair with growing concern. Willow had barely moved from her protective position, her body forming a barrier between her foal and the rest of the world. She'd accepted water and a small amount of feed, but her focus remained unwavering. "You should get some rest yourself," Emma said softly to the mare. "You're no good to him if you collapse." The foal, still unnamed, had shown brief moments of improvement throughout the day. He had nursed twice more, and for a short while had lifted his head, blinking large, dark eyes at his new surroundings. But as evening approached, he had begun to decline again. Emma checked her watch, 11:42 p.m. Dr. Reeves had promised to come first thing in the morning, but Emma was growing increasingly certain that might be too late. "Come on, little one," she urged, reaching out to stroke the foal's neck. His skin felt cool to the touch despite the warmth of the box. "Fight!" As if in response to her voice, the foal's breathing suddenly grew more labored. His tiny ribcage heaved with the effort of drawing air, each breath a visible struggle. "No, no, no," Emma whispered, heart racing as she moved closer. "Don't you dare give up now." Willow sensed the change immediately. The mare struggled to her feet, whinnying with distress as she nudged her baby with increasing urgency. When there was no response, she turned to Emma with such human-like desperation that it stole Emma's breath. "I know, girl. I know," Emma said, fumbling for her phone. She dialed Dr. Reeves' emergency number, pacing the length of the stall as it rang. After 4 rings, a groggy voice answered. "Doc Reeves." "James, it's Emma Sullivan. That mare and foal I told you about. The foal's crashing. I need you now." There was a pause, then the sound of movement. Symptoms: labored breathing, unresponsive, temperature dropping. Emma listed, her rancher's experience taking over despite her panic. "He was nursing earlier, but hasn't in the last 2 hours. Could be pneumonia, could be failure to thrive. Either way, I'm on my way," Reeves said, his voice now fully alert. 20 minutes. In the meantime, keep him warm. If you've got any colostrum supplement from spring calving, try to get some into him." "I'll try," Emma promised before ending the call. She hurried to the feed room, where she kept emergency supplies. Rummaging through a cabinet, she found the container of colostrum supplement, the nutrient-rich first milk that newborns needed to build immunity. She quickly mixed it according to the instructions, hands shaking slightly as she worked. When she returned to the stall, the foal's condition had deteriorated further. His breathing was now a series of shallow gasps, and his small body shuddered with each effort. "Stay with me," Emma pleaded, kneeling beside him. She carefully lifted his head, trying to dribble some of the liquid into his mouth using a syringe without a needle. Most of it dribbled out the sides of his mouth, his swallowing reflex too weak to function properly. Willow paced the stall in agitation, occasionally stopping to press her muzzle against her baby, as if trying to infuse him with her own strength. The mare's eyes were wild with fear, her movements growing increasingly frantic. "It's okay, Willow," Emma said, though she didn't believe her own words. "Help is coming." The minutes dragged by with agonizing slowness. Emma found herself counting the foal's breaths, each one a small victory against the encroaching silence that threatened. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the eaves of the barn like a mournful song. Emma's other horses had gone quiet, as if sensing the gravity of what was happening in the far stall. "You have to live," Emma whispered to the foal, surprising herself with the intensity of her attachment to this animal she'd known for less than a day. "Your mama came all this way to find help for you. You can't give up now." The foal's eyes fluttered open briefly at the sound of her voice, dark pools of innocence that seemed to look straight through her. Then they closed again, his small body going alarmingly still. Emma's heart sank. She'd seen animals die before. It was an inevitable part of ranch life. But something about this felt different, more personal, more significant. In the distance, the sound of a vehicle approaching cut through the night. Emma nearly sobbed with relief. "Hang on," she told the foal, squeezing his tiny hoof. "Just hang on a little longer." The headlights of Dr. Reeves' truck swept across the barn walls as he pulled up outside, the gravel crunching under his tires. Emma was already at the door, waving him in frantically. "In here," she called, her voice cracking with urgency. "He's barely breathing." James Reeves moved with the efficient speed of a man who'd spent 30 years responding to rural emergencies. In his 60s now, with silver hair and weathered hands, he carried a large medical bag and a portable oxygen unit. "Let me see him," he said, kneeling beside the foal without hesitation. His experienced hands moved over the tiny body, checking vitals, examining membranes, assessing with practiced precision. Willow backed into the corner of the stall, eyes rolling with fear at the stranger, but making no move to interfere. It was as if she understood this was her baby's only chance. "Premature," Dr. Reeves muttered, listening to the foal's chest with his stethoscope. "And there's fluid in the lungs. This little guy needs intensive care, Emma. More than I can provide here." "What are you saying?" Emma asked, though she already knew the answer. "We need to get him to the clinic in Bozeman. They've got the neonatal equipment." He looked up at her, his expression grave. "Even then, his chances aren't good. But it's his only shot." Emma nodded, already calculating the logistics. "My trailer's hitched. We can leave right now." "What about the mare?" Dr. Reeves asked, glancing at Willow, who watched them with trembling intensity. "She comes too," Emma said firmly. "I'm not separating them." The vet looked like he might argue, but then nodded. "She'll need treatment anyway. Those wounds are infected." What followed was a blur of activity. Emma backed her truck and horse trailer up to the barn entrance while Dr. Reeves administered emergency medications to stabilize the foal for transport. Toby, who Emma had called on her way out to the truck, arrived disheveled in pajama pants and a hastily pulled-on jacket. "Watch the ranch," Emma instructed him. "I don't know when we'll be back." Getting Willow into the trailer proved unexpectedly simple. Once she understood her foal was being loaded, she followed with barely a hesitation, her injured leg forgotten in her determination to stay close. "I've never seen a mare so bonded," Dr. Reeves remarked as they secured the partition to keep Willow from accidentally stepping on her baby during transit. The drive to Bozeman normally took 45 minutes, but Emma made it in 30, driving with white-knuckled focus through the dark Montana night. Beside her, Dr. Reeves kept up a running commentary on the foal's condition via a two-way radio connected to the trailer's interior, where he was monitoring the animals. Breathing shallow but steady, his voice crackled. "Mare's agitated but managing." "How much longer?" 10 minutes, Emma replied, pressing the accelerator harder as they passed the city limits sign. The all-night equine hospital was located on the outskirts of Bozeman, a modern facility that served ranchers across 3 counties. As Emma pulled into the parking lot, a team was already waiting, alerted by Dr. Reeves' earlier call. Premature foal, respiratory distress, maternal malnutrition. Dr. Reeves called out as they opened the trailer doors. The staff moved with practiced efficiency, carefully transferring the barely conscious foal onto a gurney. Willow let out a piercing whinny as they wheeled her baby away, lunging against the trailer ties that held her in place. "The mare's coming too," Emma insisted, stepping between Willow and the startled staff. "They need to stay together." "Hospital protocol," one of the techs began. "To hell with protocol," Emma interrupted. "She found me to save her baby. I'm not betraying that trust now." Dr. Lisa Chun, the head veterinarian, assessed the situation quickly. "Fine. Bring her, but she stays in the observation area. If she becomes disruptive, she goes to the stables." Emma nodded gratefully, untying Willow and leading her down the trailer ramp. The mare was limping badly now, exhaustion finally taking its toll, but her eyes never left the disappearing gurney with her foal. Inside the sterile brightness of the hospital, Emma felt suddenly out of place in her mud-splattered jeans and flannel, her hair wild from the wind and worry. Willow pressed close to her side, trembling at the unfamiliar smells and sounds. "It's okay," Emma murmured, stroking the mare's neck. "We're going to get through this." They were led to a large observation room with glass windows looking into the treatment area, where a team of veterinarians now surrounded the foal. Machines beeped, oxygen flowed, and skilled hands worked to save the tiny life that had, in the span of a day, become inexplicably precious to Emma. Willow stood perfectly still, her gaze fixed on her baby through the glass. Every few moments, she would let out a soft nicker, as if trying to reassure him that she was still there, still watching, still waiting. "You should sit down," Dr. Reeves said gently, guiding Emma to a bench along the wall. "It could be a long night." "I'm not leaving," Emma said, her voice raw with emotion she couldn't explain. "I know," the vet replied, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Neither of you are." Time in hospital waiting rooms follows its own cruel rhythm, stretching minutes into hours while simultaneously blurring them together. Emma sat on the hard plastic bench, her back against the wall, watching Willow, who hadn't moved an inch since they'd arrived. The mare stood sentinel at the observation window, her eyes fixed on the treatment room where veterinarians worked frantically over her foal. The reception area clock read 3:17 a.m. They'd been there nearly 3 hours. "Coffee." Dr. Reeves appeared beside Emma, holding out a paper cup of something that smelled vaguely like burned motor oil. "Thanks," she murmured, taking it gratefully. The warmth against her palms was comforting, even if the liquid inside was barely drinkable. "They're doing everything they can," he said, following her gaze to the treatment room. "Dr. Chun is the best equine neonatologist in 3 states." Emma nodded, too exhausted for words. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from Toby checking in. She typed a quick response, "Still waiting. No news yet." A young veterinary technician approached cautiously, eyeing Willow with professional concern. "Ma'am, we really should examine your mare while you're waiting. Those wounds need treatment." "She won't leave that window," Emma said, knowing it with absolute certainty. "We could sedate her." "No," Emma interrupted firmly. "She needs to be alert when her foal needs her." The tech looked like she might argue, but seemed to think better of it. "I'll bring some supplies here then. We can at least clean those cuts." As the tech walked away, Dr. Reeves settled beside Emma on the bench. "You want to tell me how you really found them?" he asked quietly. Emma looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" "Emma, I've known you for 15 years. You're not one for dramatic stories, but they just showed up at my barn seems a bit thin, even for you." She sighed, rubbing her temples where a headache was forming. "That's honestly what happened, James. I went out for morning chores and there she was, standing in the mist like some ghost horse. She led me to the foal." "Led you?" "Yes, led me. Deliberately." Emma met his skeptical gaze. "I know how it sounds, but that mare knew exactly what she was doing. She found me because she needed help." Dr. Reeves was silent for a moment. "There have been reports," he said finally. "About 20 miles north. Ranch foreclosure last month. Owner couldn't afford to feed his stock anymore. Some animals were seized, but others went missing before authorities arrived." Emma felt a surge of anger. "You think she's from there?" "Could be. The description matches. Bay mare, no markings." The condition certainly fits. Starvation, abuse. His voice hardened. Some people shouldn't be allowed near animals. If that's true, she escaped to save her baby, Emma said, looking at Willow with new understanding. She broke free and traveled 20 miles while in labor or just after giving birth. Extraordinary, but not impossible. Maternal instinct is a powerful force. They fell silent as the tech returned with antiseptic, bandages, and wound ointment. To everyone's surprise, Willow allowed her injuries to be treated without protest, so long as she could maintain her position at the window. The tech worked quickly, cleaning the deep gash on Willow's leg and applying antibiotic cream to the wounds across her flanks. "These are definitely whip marks," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Multiple strikes, different times. This wasn't a one-time thing." Emma felt sick. The evidence of systematic abuse was written across Willow's body in a language of scars both fresh and old. Yet the mare had somehow maintained her trust in humans enough to seek help rather than flee deeper into the wilderness. Through the glass, Emma could see Dr. Chen inserting an foal into the foal's tiny leg. The little one lay motionless under the bright lights, dwarfed by the medical equipment surrounding him. "What are his chances?" Emma asked Dr. Reeves, needing honesty more than comfort. The vet sighed. 50-50 at best. The first 24 hours are critical for any foal, but especially a premature one. If he makes it through the night. He left the sentence unfinished. As dawn approached, other clients began to filter into the waiting area. Ranchers with scheduled appointments, a family with a colicky pony, a man leading a limping quarter horse. They all gave Willow a wide berth, sensing something extraordinary in her unwavering vigil. At exactly 6:42 a.m., Dr. Chun emerged from the treatment room, pulling off her surgical cap as she approached. Emma stood immediately, her heart racing. "He's stabilized," Dr. Chun said without preamble. "We've got him on oxygen, antibiotics for the pneumonia, and a feeding tube to supplement what little he's getting from mom. The next 12 hours will tell us more." "Can she see him?" Emma asked, nodding toward Willow. Dr. Chen hesitated, then nodded. "I think that would be good for both of them. But just for a few minutes. We need to continue treatment." The door to the treatment room opened, and Willow's entire demeanor changed instantly. Her ears pricked forward, her nostrils flared, and a soft nicker escaped her throat. With careful steps, she followed Emma and Dr. Chun into the sterile room, her focus entirely on the small form lying on the treatment table. The reunion was brief but powerful. Willow stretched her neck to sniff her baby from head to tail, as if conducting her own medical assessment. The foal, though still critically weak, responded to his mother's presence with a slight movement of his head toward her sound. "He knows she's here," one of the techs whispered. After a few precious moments, Dr. Chen signaled that it was time to continue treatment. To Emma's surprise, Willow backed away willingly, as if understanding the necessity of the separation. Back in the observation area, Willow resumed her post at the window, but her stance had changed subtly. There was something almost hopeful in the way she held herself now. "She knows he's fighting," Emma said softly. Dr. Reeves nodded. "And so is she." Morning sunlight streamed through the east-facing windows of the veterinary hospital, casting long rectangles of warmth across the waiting room floor. Emma had dozed off briefly, her head resting against the wall, but snapped awake at the sound of approaching footsteps. Dr. Chun was walking toward them, clipboard in hand, her expression carefully neutral in the way medical professionals perfect over years of delivering uncertain news. Emma stood quickly, her stiff muscles protesting after hours on the hard bench. Beside her, Willow hadn't moved from her position at the window, but her ears swiveled back to track the veterinarian's approach. "How is he?" Emma asked, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. Dr. Chen's professional mask softened slightly. "He's responding to treatment better than we expected. His oxygen levels have improved, and he's maintaining his body temperature with less assistance." "That's good, right?" Emma pressed, searching the doctor's face for confirmation. "It's cautiously promising," Dr. Chen replied. "He's malnourished and underweight, which complicates his prematurity, but he's showing a surprising will to live." She glanced at Willow with professional admiration. "Your mare produced remarkably nutrient-rich colostrum despite her own poor condition. That's given him a fighting chance." Relief washed over Emma in a wave so powerful she had to steady herself against the wall. "Can I see him?" Briefly, Dr. Chen agreed. We've moved him to the NICU stall. It's set up for mare and foal interaction while still providing the medical support he needs. They followed Dr. Chen down a corridor to a special stall with built-in medical equipment. The foal lay on thick bedding, and four-line running to his neck and a small oxygen hood covering his muzzle. He looked impossibly fragile under the bright lights, his dark coat emphasizing his thinness. Willow approached cautiously, her movements measured as if afraid to disturb the medical equipment. She lowered her head to sniff her baby, then looked back at Emma and Dr. Chun with eyes that seemed to ask a question. It's okay, Emma assured her, though she looked to Dr. Chun for confirmation. Go ahead, the veterinarian nodded. Contact is good for both of them now. With permission granted, Willow carefully settled herself beside her foal, positioning her body so the little one could feel her warmth without being crowded by her weight. The foal responded immediately, his breathing deepening as he sensed his mother's presence. I've never seen a bond quite like theirs, Dr. Chen remarked quietly. It's almost as if they're communicating without vocalizing. Emma watched as the foal's tiny nostrils flared, taking in his mother's scent. For the first time since she'd found him in the field, his eyes opened fully, dark, liquid pools that seemed too knowing for a creature so young. He's going to need round-the-clock care, Dr. Chun continued. For antibiotics, supplemental feeding, oxygen therapy. We'll need to monitor for sepsis, which is a significant risk in premature foals. Whatever it takes, Emma said firmly. Cost isn't an issue. The words came automatically, though somewhere in the back of her mind, she recognized the financial implications of such a commitment. Dr. Chen nodded, making notes on her clipboard. He's responding well to the mare's presence. I'd like to keep them together as much as possible during treatment. What about her injuries? Emma asked, glancing at Willow's bandaged leg. The wounds are infected, as we suspected, but the antibiotics should address that. The more concerning issue is her overall condition, severe malnutrition, muscle wasting. Dr. Chen's expression hardened. She's been systematically starved, Emma. The fact that she carried this pregnancy to even near term is remarkable. Emma felt that familiar surge of anger. If I ever find who did this, the sheriff has been notified, Dr. Chen interrupted gently. Dr. Reeves filed a report this morning. They'll investigate, but she left the sentence unfinished. They both knew how these things often went in rural areas where animals were still considered primarily property. What's your prognosis? Emma asked, returning her focus to the foal. Honestly, Dr. Chun considered the question carefully. If he makes it through the next 48 hours, his chances improve significantly. He's shown remarkable resilience already. She offered a cautious smile. I've seen sicker foals pull through. He has excellent care, a dedicated mother, and now he has you. Me? Emma said, surprised. Don't underestimate the power of having someone fighting for you. Dr. Chen replied simply. Animals sense that. A young tech appeared at the doorway. Dr. Chen, your 8 o'clock is here. I'll be right there. She turned back to Emma. You should go home, get some rest. We'll call you with any changes. Emma shook her head. I'm staying. Dr. Chen looked like she might argue, but then nodded in understanding. I'll have the staff bring you a cot. And maybe some real coffee, not that waiting room sludge. Thank you, Emma said, feeling a wave of gratitude for this woman who understood without being told. After the veterinarian left, Emma settled on a stool in the corner of the stall. Willow acknowledged her presence with a soft nickering sound before returning her attention to her foal. For the first time since this strange journey began, Emma allowed herself to think beyond the immediate crisis. If the foal survived, when he survived, she corrected herself firmly. What then? She hadn't planned on taking in 2 more horses, especially ones with such specialized needs. The foal stirred, struggling weakly to lift his head. Willow immediately responded, shifting position to help him find a more comfortable angle. The instinctive communication between them was something to behold. You're going to be okay, little guy, Emma said softly. The foal's ear twitched at the sound of her voice, and for a brief moment, his gaze seemed to find hers. In that connection, Emma felt something shift inside her, a sliver of hope taking root, fragile but undeniable. Whatever happened next, these two had already changed something fundamental in her world. 2 weeks after their dramatic hospital stay, Emma stood at the fence of the small paddock adjacent to her barn, watching as Willow and her foal enjoyed the morning sunshine. The transformation in both animals was remarkable, though still far from complete. Willow's coat had begun to shed its dull, matted appearance, revealing glimpses of the rich bay color beneath. Her wounds were healing, the angry red lines across her flanks fading to pink. She still favored her injured leg slightly, but Dr. Chen had assured Emma that with time and proper care, she would likely regain full mobility. The foal, still officially unnamed on his medical records, had defied all expectations. After 3 critical days in the hospital, he had turned a corner, his will to live proving stronger than his physical frailties. Now, back at the ranch for just over a week, he was attempting his first real explorations of the world. "Look at you go," Emma called encouragingly as the foal took several wobbling steps across the packed earth, his spindly legs still uncertain but growing stronger each day. Willow hovered nearby, her maternal vigilance never wavering. She allowed her baby these small adventures, but stayed close enough to intervene if needed. The bond between them remained extraordinary, a silent communication that Emma found herself envying at times. "Coffee's ready," called a voice from the direction of the house. Toby approached carrying 2 steaming mugs, his lanky frame silhouetted against the morning light. "Thanks," Emma said, accepting the mug gratefully. The young ranch hand had proven invaluable during this ordeal, taking on extra responsibilities without complaint while Emma focused on the newcomers. "He's getting braver," Toby observed, leaning against the fence beside her. Yesterday, he wouldn't go more than 2 feet from her side. "Progress," Emma agreed. Dr. Chun says every day he stays active and eating is a victory at this point. They watched in companionable silence as the foal attempted a clumsy skip, his excitement momentarily overriding his physical limitations. He stumbled, catching himself before toppling over, then looked back at his mother as if seeking approval for his daring. "You heard anything from the sheriff about where they came from?" Toby asked, his voice carefully neutral. Emma shook her head. "Nothing definitive. They're investigating that foreclosure Dr. Reeves mentioned, but the owners disappeared. Skipped town, apparently." "Coward," Toby muttered, his young face hardening with anger. "The important thing is they're safe now," Emma said, though her own anger still simmered beneath the surface. The thought of someone systematically abusing and starving these animals made her blood boil. The sound of tires on gravel announced a visitor. Emma turned to see Dr. Chen's SUV coming up the driveway for their scheduled checkup. "Right on time," Emma remarked, draining the last of her coffee. "Can you finish mucking out Rusty's stall while I'm with the vet?" "Yes, ma'am." Toby nodded, taking her empty mug. Dr. Chun emerged from her vehicle carrying her medical bag and a folder of papers. Her professional demeanor was softened by the genuine smile that spread across her face as she observed the foal's activities. "Well, would you look at that?" she said, approaching the fence. "Someone's feeling adventurous today." "He started about an hour ago," Emma replied. "Couldn't seem to sit still this morning." "That's exactly what we want to see." Dr. Chen opened the paddock gate carefully. "Let's do their checkups out here since they're comfortable." The examination proceeded with surprising ease. Willow, once so fearful of strangers, now tolerated Dr. Chen's presence with cautious acceptance. She still positioned herself between the veterinarian and her foal when possible, but there was no longer panic in her eyes. "Her wounds are healing beautifully," Dr. Chen reported, finishing her examination of Willow. "And she's gained nearly 40 pounds since hospitalization." "She's eating well," Emma confirmed, though she still hoards food in the corner of her stall. Dr. Chen nodded sadly. "That may never completely go away. Starvation leaves psychological scars as well as physical ones." Turning her attention to the foal, Dr. Chun conducted a thorough assessment, checking his heart rate, lung sounds, hydration, and reflexes. The little one tolerated the handling with surprising patience, though he kept his eyes fixed on his mother throughout. "His improvement is remarkable," Dr. Chun announced finally. "We're not out of the woods yet. He'll need continued monitoring and special nutrition, but I'm officially upgrading his prognosis from guarded to good." Relief flooded through Emma. "That's fantastic news." "He's a fighter," Dr. Chin smiled, packing away her stethoscope. "And he has an excellent support system." She gestured toward both Willow and Emma. As they walked back toward the house to complete the paperwork, Dr. Chun handed Emma the folder she'd brought. "I've compiled some resources on rehabilitating abused horses. Psychological recovery can be more challenging than physical in some ways. I've noticed, Emma admitted. Willow still startles at sudden movements, and she's wary of anyone new. It will take time, Dr. Chun said gently. But the fact that she trusted you enough to seek help that first morning tells me she has good instincts about people. Build on that foundation. After Dr. Chun left, Emma returned to the paddock with a brush and some apple slices, part of the trust-building routine she'd established. Willow approached cautiously but willingly, accepting the treat from Emma's palm with delicate precision. Good girl, Emma murmured, beginning to brush the mare's neck in long, soothing strokes. Willow's eyes half closed in pleasure, her body gradually relaxing under the gentle attention. The foal, emboldened by his mother's acceptance, ventured closer to Emma than he ever had before. His curiosity overcame his caution as he stretched his neck to sniff her jeans. Hello there, Emma said softly, remaining perfectly still. Nice to officially meet you. Tentatively, she extended her hand, palm down, allowing the foal to investigate her scent. His velvety muzzle brushed against her fingers, whisper soft, before he startled himself with his own bravery and scampered back to his mother's side. Emma laughed, the sound surprising her. It had been a long time since genuine laughter had echoed across her ranch. Baby steps, she told them both, continuing to brush Willow's coat. We've got all the time in the world. As the Montana morning unfolded around them, Emma felt something shifting within her, a quiet reclamation of something she'd lost when Jake died. These broken creatures, finding their way back to wholeness day by day, were somehow helping her do the same. The foal took another wobbling step toward her, his dark eyes curious rather than fearful. Progress indeed. The Montana autumn painted the landscape in rich amber and gold, the cottonwoods along the creek blazing like torches against the deepening blue of the October sky. 3 months had passed since that misty morning when Emma's life had changed with the arrival of 2 unexpected guests. Today, the paddock gate stood open, connecting to the smaller of Emma's pastures, a milestone in the ongoing rehabilitation. Willow grazed contentedly, her once skeletal frame now filled out with healthy muscle and gleaming coat. Only faint lines of scar tissue along her flanks remained as evidence of her previous suffering. They're ready, Dr. Reeves declared, leaning against the fence beside Emma. He'd stopped by to deliver vaccines and stayed to marvel at the transformation. I wouldn't have bet money on that foal surviving, let alone thriving like this. Emma smiled, watching as the foal, strong and steadier with each passing day, executed a perfect series of playful kicks before galloping in a wide circle around his mother. His dark coat gleamed in the sunlight, his movements growing more coordinated and confident by the day. It's time he had a proper name, Emma said. I can't keep calling him Little One forever. The paperwork needs a name anyway, Dr. Reeves agreed, pulling a folder from his truck. I've got the registration forms here. Since no owner has been identified despite the investigation, the county's approved your adoption petition. Emma took the paperwork, a surge of emotion catching her by surprise. After weeks of uncertainty, while the sheriff's department attempted to locate the original owner, the horses were officially hers. The abandoned ranch where they'd likely come from had been foreclosed upon, its owner vanishing without a trace, leaving behind unpaid debts and, apparently, unwanted animals. Jasper, Emma said suddenly, watching the foal prance across the pasture. His name is Jasper. Jasper, Dr. Reeves repeated, nodding approvingly. Strong name for a strong survivor. And the mare? Still calling her Willow? Yes, Emma confirmed. It suits her. Bent but not broken. She filled out the registration forms, making it official. Willow and Jasper Sullivan, the newest residents of Bridger Mountain Ranch. From the house, Emma heard the phone ringing. Would you mind waiting? That might be Toby about the feed delivery. Dr. Reeves waved her off. Go ahead. I'll just enjoy the show out here. Emma jogged to the house, catching the phone on its final ring. To her surprise, it wasn't Toby but Martin Collins, the local high school principal. Emma, glad I caught you, he said. I'm calling about our equine therapy program for at-risk students. Teresa Johnson mentioned you might be interested in participating. Emma hesitated. Teresa, the school counselor, had indeed approached her about the program during a chance meeting at the feed store last week. Emma had been non-committal then, uncertain about opening her private sanctuary to strangers, especially teenagers. I'm not sure, Martin, she began. Before you decide, he interrupted. Let me explain why I'm calling today specifically. We had a situation this morning with a student, Lily Blackwood. 15, new to our school, been through some rough times in foster care. She had a panic attack in class and won't talk to anyone. Teresa thinks connecting with animals might help where people can't. Emma watched through the window as Jasper approached Dr. Reeves curiously, no longer afraid of human strangers as he once had been. What exactly would be involved? She asked, something tugging at her heart. Just one student at first. Supervised visits, maybe twice a week. No riding, just grooming, feeding, basic care. Teresa would accompany her. Martin's voice softened. This kid needs something to trust, Emma. Something to care about beyond herself. Emma thought of Willow, how the mare had summoned the courage to seek help not for herself, but for her baby. Sometimes, caring for another was the path to healing yourself. Send her out tomorrow after school, Emma said decisively. I'll introduce her to Willow and Jasper. After hanging up, Emma returned to the pasture, a plan forming in her mind. Dr. Reeves looked up from where he was now crouched near Jasper, who was investigating the vet's hat with great interest. Everything okay? He asked, noting her thoughtful expression. More than okay, Emma replied. I think our survivors here might be ready for a new purpose. She explained the school's request, watching as understanding dawned on the vet's face. Perfect fit, he nodded. Animals that have healed from trauma helping people do the same. There's something beautifully circular about that. As if understanding she was being discussed, Willow approached, gently nudging Emma's shoulder with her muzzle, a gesture of affection that had developed gradually over their months together. What do you think, girl? Emma asked softly, stroking the mare's sleek neck. Ready to help someone else find their way? Willow's response was to release a soft breath against Emma's palm, the equine equivalent of a sigh of contentment. Jasper, not to be left out, pranced over to join them, his movements now strong and sure where once they had been fragile and uncertain. Later that evening, as the setting sun painted the sky in spectacular shades of crimson and gold, Emma sat on the porch steps watching Willow and Jasper silhouetted against the twilight. In the distance, the Bridger Mountains stood sentinel, their peaks catching the last of the day's light. We did it, Jake, she whispered to the memory of her husband. For the first time in years, the ache of his absence felt less like an open wound and more like a healed scar, tender but no longer raw. Inside the house, Emma had already begun preparing for tomorrow's visitor, setting aside the softest brushes for small hands, planning which treats might appeal to a withdrawn teenager, thinking about how to explain the special bond between Willow and Jasper in a way that might resonate with a child who had experienced loss. As darkness settled over the ranch, Emma made her final evening check on the barn. Willow and Jasper had come in from the pasture on their own, the routine now familiar and comforting. They stood together in their shared stall, Jasper nestled against his mother's side despite having grown strong enough to stand confidently on his own. Good night, you two, Emma said softly. Tomorrow brings new adventures. Willow's ears pricked forward at the sound of Emma's voice, her intelligent eyes reflecting the barn's soft light. In that gaze, Emma saw not just recognition but understanding, the silent communication of creatures who had journeyed from desperation to sanctuary together. As Emma turned to leave, Jasper let out a playful whinny, as if offering his own good night. The sound echoed through the barn, strong, vibrant, full of life. From the misty uncertainty of that first morning to the clear promise of tomorrow, they had come full circle. Three souls, once broken in different ways, now forming a family under the vast Montana sky. Bent but not broken, wounded but healing, lost but finally, irrevocably found. Emma closed the barn door softly behind her, the stars overhead brilliant in the clear mountain air. As she walked back to the house, her steps were lighter than they had been in years. A new beginning, indeed. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and if you've watched this far, comment, I watched all the way through, and leave your opinion about this story. And don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the end screen. It's very exciting.